I would like to remind you that for more Microsoft webcasts, you can go to Microsoft.com/webcast. Thanks again for joining us on today's MSDN webcast, Agile Project Planning. It is now my pleasure to introduce your presenter, Cheryl Hammond, ALM Consultant with Northwest Cadence. Cheryl, you have the floor.
Good morning, everybody, and Phil, thank you so much for that introduction and all the logistics you do to make this webcast go smoothly. I appreciate it. Good morning. So, this morning we're going to talk about Agile Project Planning, and specifically we'll talk about the new features in Visual Studio 11 Beta that make Agile Project Management a lot simpler, a lot smoother, it's more streamlined, it's a lot more fun. My background previous to joining Northwest Cadence, which I did last year, was that I worked for 10.5 years at the University of Washington, and I was a Scrum Master on a development team and also a developer. So I've had some experience in running Scrum teams, and we used Team Foundation Server 2008 and Visual Studio 2008 back at that time. So I'm pretty excited knowing what I know about trying to manage projects in that environment, about the new features. They really have addressed a lot of the specific pain points that my team, and I know many of yours, encountered in trying to be Agile while using Team Foundation Server tools. So let's dig in and start talking a little bit about where that comes from, what's motivating us to add these new features, and then we'll really spend the majority of the hour in demos, looking at them, being hands-on with how to use this stuff effectively. As Phil mentioned, I welcome your questions throughout the presentation. I've got a little panel there that will show me when they pop up. I'll keep kind of half an eye on that, and as I notice you, I'm happy to work my answers to those questions into the presentation as we go. I love to have an interactive conversation, because if what I'm saying is not super useful to you, I want to know, and then we'll change direction. So definitely don't hesitate to give me that kind of feedback. All right, let's jump in and talk a little bit about the context, first of all. Why is Agile so important? We've been talking about agility for a lot of years. The original Agile Manifesto was 2001. The dissertation that turned into the guidelines for Scrum was actually written in the early 90s. So the ideas behind agility are not new, but the reason we aren't all doing it yet is because it's not easy. Here's where folks are at with Agile as of the last couple of years. These are based on some surveys self-reported by teams as to what named process do they say that they are using or trying to use. And so we've seen a couple of trends. First of all, over on the right, you see that that Agile in some form, by lots of different names, in 2009 was at 35% of the teams surveyed by Forrester. And it's actually up now. In 2011, it was 38%. So agility is very clearly the plurality of teams, and a lot of organizations are moving towards Agile for the reasons that are listed on this slide. They want to improve their product's quality. They want to manage the inevitability of change. They've given up trying to fight it with more specs and more sign-offs, and they've just come to understand that the customers will change their minds, and the customers will always win that argument. And so as a team, it's simply self-defense for us to put in place a process that's highly flexible and able to be responsive to that change without wasting the team's time and wasting a lot of work. We want to increase the customer satisfaction in our competitive environment, whether we're private sector, public sector, anywhere else. We still have to increase the satisfaction of our end users. And it's not really an option. And we have to speed time to market, because that's what everybody else is going to do, and we need to get there, somewhere near first. Because there's not really all that much room for, 9th and 10th and 12th. It's like when, the Amazing Race, you get closer and closer to finals, and coming in 5th routinely stops working. Having said all that, so agility, 35% and rising, 38% in 2011. What I think is really interesting about this is that the chief competitor to Agile we sometimes think of as being waterfall process, and it isn't. Waterfall is a tiny, tiny fraction of projects managed using something that they admit to being waterfall. 8.4 in 2009 and on the decline. The long-term formal processes that are truly waterfall-based are really much less being used, and hardly anybody wants to admit to using them, and nobody really aspires to them anymore. Everybody knows that we need something that is flexible and responsive to change in some manner. The chief competitor to Agile is actually this other remaining box, which is teams who do not have a defined process. And I think of that as probably breaking down into two groups, although Forrester didn't ask them this. One is, we have no idea what we're doing, and I think that's a lot of teams. And then another one might be, we have made up an imaginary process and we're doing that. And that may or may not be working. So, all of this is just to kind of set the stage for why are we talking about Agile, what's different about Agile, and understand why is it a challenge and why are we still introducing new tools? Why hasn't this problem been solved ages ago if Agile's been around for so long? Because it's definitely not easy to do something that is so flexible and so open-ended. But the important thing is almost everybody is aspiring to be Agile in some manner. Odds are that's why a lot of you are here, is because you want to understand more about how to make either your existing Agile process more effective or how to get started with it. And that's what we're going to jump in and spend a lot of time on this morning. So as an overview, we'll talk about for Visual Studio 11 Beta, which was released in February of this year. It's out. You can get it. There is a Go Live license that comes with Visual Studio 11 Beta. What that means is if you take apps that you've developed in it to production, you will have support from Microsoft. That kind of gives you an idea that they're pretty confident that that's a stable product that's ready for your teams to use. But whether you are ready to do that or you just want to grab the beta, play around with it, and understand how it works, either one, it's out there, it's available. These are the key features that are new to Visual Studio 11 since 2010 that are targeted at assisting Agile teams to be more effective. And so we're going to look at all of these things today, and we'll get into as much detail as we can make time for. We have better tools for managing your backlog, better tools for planning your sprints or iterations, and better tools for managing within your sprint the individual tasks that your team is doing and giving visibility to the status of those tasks. Those of you who are familiar with Visual Studio 2010 may recall that after 2010 was released, there was an add-on, there was a pack later on that included an official Microsoft-supported Scrum template. So it didn't come out of the box initially with 2010, but it came later. The Scrum Template 1.0 was something that was added to the suite of process templates that come out of the box with Visual Studio. And so Scrum Template 2.0 with enhancements has been added as an out-of-the-box ships with Visual Studio 11 Beta. And we will be working in the Scrum template today, but I'll also talk to you a little bit about the different template choices so that you can understand those kinds of things better and figure out which template is the best choice for your team. The Agile template that many of you may have seen in previous versions of TFS is also still present. It has been spruced up for 11 as well. We won't be demoing in it, but it is there, and we can talk about that a little bit if you are interested. So let's jump right into demoing. I'm going to leave this slide up for just a moment because don't try to write that URL down. That's not why it's there. That would be terrible. We will be demoing today using a virtual machine that's built and provided by Microsoft. And it's not just a copy of Visual Studio 11 Beta, though it is. It has 11 Beta Ultimate on it. But what it is that's more important is that it comes with a little sample app. Last time, 2010, it was Contoso, the Tailspin Toys. This time it's Fabricam Fiber. So they've created a scenario of an imaginary IT shop that is developing some software that's got customer-facing and internal components, and it has web bits and built-in bugs and all kinds of stuff that allow you to work through and explore with something real because just getting the beta and opening it up and having it be empty is kind of useful, but not as helpful as it is to actually be able to look at code in the new system. So it comes with code, it comes with bugs, it comes with work items, all the stuff you need. To get it, the easiest thing is to open your favorite search engine and type in Brian Keller ALM 11. That will generally take you to one of the top results being this very long URL that you're not writing down right now, which is Brian Keller's blog, where you can go to download the Hyper-V virtual machine for yourself. It's free. You can put it on any machine that supports Hyper-V and run it, and then you basically pretty much remote into it, which is what we're going to do just now. And you can get the companion hands-on labs. It's a series of Word documents that just walk you step by step through some of the features and what you can explore and try to see how the new system works. So hopefully I've stalled enough to give you time to write down Brian Keller, ALM 11. And now we're going to hop over and look at the demo, and we'll spend most of the rest of the hour there playing around with features in Visual Studio. Yay. So this I know normally takes a few minutes to draw in, and I'm going to give it a chance for you guys to see that whole screen. And hopefully, so the screen that I have where my QA panel is not drawn in yet either. So if I miss your question, bear with me. I will try to check back every few minutes to see if there's been a question that I can help with. I know some of you are having logistical questions about the live meeting session as well. So do that, and the nice folks, Phil and the nice folks he works with, will jump in and help you out with any live meeting challenges you may be experiencing. Come on, let's draw in now. All right, so where we are here, screen is, it's also drawing in for me. I don't know, maybe you could see it better than I can. We are in the Hyper-V virtual machine. I'm going to minimize that. There we go. And so we'll start, okay, fine. So we'll start in Visual Studio. So as you probably know, those of you familiar with previous versions of Visual Studio and TFS, some of the things that have not changed is just the overall idea that you've got Visual Studio itself. It's an application. It's an IDE, which is for developers to use pretty much for developing code. So this would be the experience that your development teams would have. And within Visual Studio, to get full advantage of all the Agile features that we're talking about today, your team will also have in place Team Foundation Server, which is going to be the core functionality that all the rest of your team members work around. And that includes not just your developers, but any testers that you may have, your business analysts, your project managers, your Scrum Master, product owner. All of those folks have a view into the data that's stored centrally in Team Foundation Server. So in this case, we have the Visual Studio IDE and developers using it. There we go. And they have a panel here on the right that is an integrated Team Explorer view looking into the Team Foundation Server. And this is in many ways the same as it's always been. It's got the same basic information, but you can see that the user interface here has been redesigned and streamlined. The idea behind having this panel sitting here, and of course the developer is always going to be very particular about where all their stuff goes, having this sitting here and they can drag it around and place it and hide it and wherever they want it to be, is that without leaving their coding environment, sitting in context, doing the activities that they do to write the code for your team, they also have access to all the information that they need about your process and about what should be happening. So, for example, you're storing your work items, your user stories, your backlog items, whatever your requirements, whatever they're called in your template or in your process. Those are stored in the Team Foundation Server work item repository, and you've got quick access for developers here to do queries against that. There's new features for developers in Visual Studio 11. We won't be looking at them in great depth today, but we will in some of my upcoming webcasts. So if you're interested in the developer experience, definitely check out some of the future MSDN webcasts where we're going to be talking about a developer's day in the life and the development side of Agile development. The My Work feature is something that devs can use to grab tasks that are assigned to them and keep track of what they're doing from day to day. It gives them additional visibility as they sit down to write their code. And then they have visibility into their work items. For them and the rest of the team, you also have the web access, which is linkable here, and I've already got the web access page up. So we'll hop, yay, it drew in beautifully. Okay, so hopefully you guys will be seeing that very soon. And this is where we're going to spend most of our time in this demo, but then depending on your feedback, we may also jump around and do some other stuff. There we go. There's my QA panel. There, awesome. Put that over there. All right, I'm watching for your questions. Okay, so as you see, first of all, in earlier versions of TFS, we've always had a web access component. The idea behind web access is I rattled off a list of lots of roles on your team, and only one of those roles was developer. Depending on how you slice and dice the work for your testers, perhaps your testers also have need to work in the Visual Studio IDE, but the rest of the folks that I named, your BAs, your manual testers, your project manager, Scrum Master, etc., have no need to have Visual Studio installed on their machines. They probably don't have a computer powerful enough to run it in the first place. Point is, it's overkill. They don't need it. They're not writing code. This is what's for them. There are lots of other options for them to look into and interact with the information in TFS without needing the heavy weight of the IDE. This is the simplest to me, which is simply to point a web browser to the Team Web Access portal. There's also a Team Explorer standalone client that can be gotten. It comes with TFS, and anybody with the TFS license can install it and use it. So that's a desktop option for them. We won't look at that today, but we'll look through this web access and all the stuff that they can do here. So if you've seen previous generations of the TFS web access, you'll see that this is a huge transformation, just in a couple of different ways. First of all, it's a lot nicer to look at. It's just prettier. You got color, so that's cool. But to me, of course, the much more important change here is that this homepage, which is the first thing you see when you go to your TFS web access now, conveys useful information. It didn't used to. The web access used to basically be a page with menus on it that allowed you to dig in and find the kind of stuff that is still here. Find queries and look at work item queries, find source control and navigate your source control, look at builds and build status. That was all here, but your introductory experience was a bunch of menus and you had to go find the stuff you were looking for. This, of course, is very much different because you have a lot of contextual information and it is constantly refreshing, so it gives you today's view of life on your project. Let me take you for a quick walk around this page, and I'll give you an idea of what all is here, and some of this stuff is customizable, and I would imagine that as we move forward with future enhancements, you know, as we move closer to the official release of Visual Studio, but also as they're shipping enhancements in the future, that this may evolve or more stuff may get added. More also may be customizable than is customizable right now. Okay, so starting over here on the top, we have the current sprint. So as you guys know, if you're doing an Agile project, you're organizing your work in relatively shorter iterations. Depends on what your process is as to how you work that. If you're doing Scrum, which this team is, you're probably referring to those as sprints. You can use that word if you're not doing Scrum. You might call them iterations, and I think that's what they're called using the MSF for Agile template. I think the terminology is going to be iterations, just more generic, but they're basically the same thing. You define as a team, you or someone on your team would have come into TFS and set up some number of sprints or iterations going forward and would have defined what they're called. You actually don't have to call them sprint 1, 2, and 3, but you can call them whatever you want. And then also have configured them with the dates that you plan to run them. Maybe I should go see if I can. Let's go look at that. So you can configure your sprints and enter what the dates will be by going here to, I clicked on the little gear that was over here. I'm now in a separate page to admin, and I can just go to these iterations. And you can see where I've got a parent release set up here, and then I've got the child sprints, and I can, as we go forward, I can come in and add sprint 7 and sprint 8 and so forth. And again, I can edit these, call them whatever I want, and they're children of this release. I can add another release, and it can have children as well. And then I can come in and configure what the start and end dates of each of these sprints are. Your team may be doing, this team's doing roughly 2-week sprints, but your team could be doing anything from a week to a month to, we've talked with folks who do day-long sprints, just kind of however your team wants to manage it. All right, so we've set up our sprints, and that information is now being picked up here. It's showing us which sprint we're currently in and the dates. This information, the bar here, is telling us that out of a capacity, which we'll look at in a little while, total team capacity of 42 hours in this sprint, we have 39 hours committed, or remaining, 39 hours of work to be done. Let's see. Yep, 39 remaining out of 42 total capacity. And we have 3 backlog items in progress. Notice that that's rolled up to the backlog item level. In Agile, that's referred to as a user story. You think of it as a requirement. In Scrum, they're called backlog items. We have 3 of those in progress. When we go to the task board, we'll see that those 3 have been broken down into lots of smaller tasks. But here it's reporting at the backlog level, which is useful. And then we have, of course, the team's burn down chart, which is showing us roughly our progress towards completion of the work we've taken on in the current sprint. And so it shows us that the remaining work has been tapering off and that we have some amount left to be done before the end of the sprint. We'll see a better version of the burn down when we drill in, and we'll see it larger with more information. So that's your basic state of the world right this moment. This, of course, would be updating live as as the team is checking things in and marking tasks done. These things change throughout a day, hopefully, because you're hopefully doing that frequently. Then we have down here an area that is quite customizable, the team favorites, and all of these tiles that contain interesting snapshots of information that you and your team have chosen that tell the story that you want to tell about your project. So this is where we really get into stuff that's customizable. Out of the box, you get 1 or 2 team favorites tiles that show up here, but the rest of these have been created by the team. And so basically, it's pretty simple. You can turn any work item query into a team favorite. And when you do that, the tile will show up here on the screen, and it will basically just say how many items there are. So depending on what kind of a work item query it is, that may or may not be useful information, but the ones that are useful would be the ones you would choose to put here. So we've got, for example, and you might choose to write the query such that it's like open feedback requests or open bugs, right? You can choose all bugs or closed, open ones or recently closed ones or whatever. We've got our overall product backlog, which we'll look at shortly, has 13 items in it. Our current sprint backlog has 23 items in it. We can click through on any of these tiles and see the actual query. So if we want to know more about what that means or what's on that list, this is a shortcut that takes us directly to that information. You can have those be queries that use the @me code word or keyword so that the individual user who logs in sees my code reviews is actually the code reviews that are assigned to that person. Same thing can be done for any other kind of thing, so bugs that are assigned to me or feedback requests that are assigned to me, whatever that is. Finally, we have a couple of other flavors of tiles that are of interest. We've got this one, the purple tiles come to us out of the Source Control Explorer, and so this is telling us that we have 5 recent changes to our dev branch. And if I click through on that, I could see the history of those check-ins and drill in and see the code check-ins in greater detail. And then, of course, we have our build report. This is pointing at a specific build definition, the nightly build against the dev branch. And it tells us which build it is, how recently it has been run, what the status of the most recent run was. And then this little chart here is very cool. It tells us for some number of the past N builds, the height of the line indicates how long it took the build to run, and then the color coding tells us green is that it passed and red is that it did not, the build was not successful. And there's a partial, and I don't know what color partial shows up as. And again, then this can take us as a click through to more details about the build report. You can do kind of anything that your team finds useful in these tabs. So I think that's pretty cool. A couple of other quick things, and then we'll get into looking at more detailed information in this portal. We've got a much friendlier view of who our team members are on this team. We've got friendly names and even cute little pictures, and those are things that people can set for themselves on their own account. And then this is specifically the members who've been assigned to this team project, so they are specifically folks who are working on the code that's in this sub-project. If you had more than one team project, you could navigate amongst all the team projects, and your team members may change because it would be per team. Alrighty, then we have a number of activities and choices here, stuff we can do. We can go look at reports. We can go view that website with the process guidance. We can go to the project portal, which is the SharePoint portal. If we have time, I'll give us a quick look at that today. We're not going to cover the new feedback manager or requesting feedback here. I've mentioned it a few times. There's a future session coming up where we're going to do a deep dive into the feedback manager in detail. And so where we're going to spend the rest of our time today is going to be looking at principally at the backlogs and the task board, and then we'll probably take a quick look at work item queries. Those haven't changed all that much, but I'll give you a quick overview of those as well. So let's start with, and you can see we've got a few shortcuts here where we can quickly add individual items. But what we're going to do instead is we're going to jump in and take a look at the backlog. So those of you that are familiar with Agile or trying to do Agile, you know that the product backlog is really the starting point of Agile for any team, and it's really where you go, excuse me, It's kind of the heart and soul of your Agile team. This is the thing. It's the source of all truth. Like, iterations are great and sprints are great, but if you don't have a really good, solid backlog that indicates what is the value you are being asked to deliver to your customers, if it doesn't tell that story, everything else you try to do in Agile is going to be difficult. So this is where you start to get a grip on what is the overall scope of work that your team is being asked to do. And one of the key features of Agile compared to other more long-term methodologies is that you need to be able to adjust this backlog on a moment's notice, because this really reflects the desires and the whims of your customer. And so it needs to be really responsive, and I'm going to say, as someone who worked in TFS 2008 and I've done demos in 2010, there was stuff that you could use to manage all the changes that were occurring to your backlog, but it wasn't good stuff. Those features were kind of clunky, kind of hard to use, and that I found was a barrier for a lot of teams in trying to get started with Agile. In 2008, it was kind of just painful. In 2010, I got the hang of some very cool tools. So for those of you in 2010, you might investigate things like the Excel worksheets, the Sprint Planning Workbook, the Agile Planning Workbook. Those were some cool things you could use that extended the functionality of TFS and allowed you to do a little bit more with them. This is where we've now seen the engineering team for Visual Studio has taken a lot of the feedback from folks over the years and has built it into the system. So there's a lot of stuff about this that is just quicker and easier to use. Number one, if I want to add a new story at any time, and again, we're using the Scrum template today, but so it's called a backlog item, but for our purposes, a user story, a backlog item, a requirement, whatever, probably not a use case, maybe a use case. That's complicated. Those things are all kind of interchangeable, and I use that language interchangeably, so if you find it confusing, grab the QA panel and ask me, and I'll clarify. So if our customer comes along and has a new story at this point and we want to add it to the backlog, it's just really simple. I can look at this whole backlog and I can insert a story in this quick way. Customer can see whether it's related messages on their portal. Hit enter, it's in. Bam. And something else that you might notice that was interesting is it didn't automatically go to the end. It went to the end because I told it to go to the end. If I add another story, customer wants some other thing, hit enter. Notice that it went where I pretty much put my line or my highlighter, I'm going to say cursor because I'm old school, wherever I chose to put it. So if I want it to go at the top, I select the first one. It'll actually go in above the top. If I want it to go to the end, I select the last one. That obviously doesn't make a huge difference here, but as our backlogs grow and we have a longer list, if we want to drop something into the middle in a place, that's how we do it. So it's easy. Now, obviously, we just entered the bare bones of a story, but do we have enough to get started as a team having a conversation about it? Yeah, we totally do. That's really all we needed was kind of a placeholder in our backlog, and now we can come back and start to fill in a little bit more of this detail. As some quick background as to what some of these stories mean, the scenario that the virtual machine is supporting here is called the Fabricam Fiber Web Team, and it's meant to be a fiber optic support telecom provider. So they have all the stuff that you would expect your telecom provider to have. They have a website where their customers can log in and do billing activities and order services and file service tickets if their telecom service is out. And they have technicians in trucks using mobile devices to go out and manage their ticket calls and go out and do their service calls, report on status, all that kind of stuff. So the web team provides software that supports all of those functionalities, and that's where this weather-related outages now starts to make maybe a little sense when we're talking about a fiber optic telecom product. So that's something that customers want to do. Somebody up in the CEO's office got the idea that that would be good to have because our competitor has it, so we're going to add that. As you can see, when I've double-clicked it, I've opened it up and I can start to do stuff with it. I'm going to assign it, first of all, to Brian Keller. It's a story, and so therefore I'm going to assign it to him because he's our product owner. It's in a state of new. I can change that to being approved by the team if we've reviewed it. We haven't yet, so I'm going to leave it here. And then I can assign an effort point estimate to it. Your teams are going to use whatever you're going to use as far as a numbering system or a whatever for your effort. And so this is just right here, and it's a free text box, and you can use whatever system makes sense to you. But if you use a numeric-based system, so I'll encourage you to do that. T-shirt sizes are awesome, and they're easy to understand. But if you use something numeric in this effort field, we'll be able to start doing something really neat with it, using some of the forecasting features that are built into Visual Studio 11. So I'm going to put an 8-point estimate here, and I'm just keeping it simple. That's all I really need to know right now. I'm going to save and close this guy. And so you can see that I've got now 8 points of effort here. And we'll do this, and we'll give this an effort value of 2 and assign it to our product owner. You can also set some defaults on some of this stuff in your process template. So if you want it to, for example, all product backlog items to be assigned to Brian Keller, you could do that. All right, so now we have a backlog, and you can see that it's in this particular order, but the CEO has called, and they are really concerned about the sexiness of the weather-related outages. So what we want to do is move this up the backlog to indicate that it has taken on a higher priority. We can change priority at any time. That's up to the customer. So I'm grabbing it, and I'm just going to drag it to where I want it to be, which happens to be at the top, and let it go. Bam, that's it. It was that simple. Back in previous versions of TFS, I would have to open the item and change the value in a field, and we had to torture the fields a little bit in order to get everything else on the backlog to reorder itself. That's now automatic. I don't have to think about it. I just drag this thing to where I want it to be. That makes my life a lot easier, and it's a ridiculously simple little feature. So I've reordered my backlog. I can do another thing here. Using this chart that's at the top here, you can see that this actually represents my team's overall velocity up to this point. And you may recall from the home page that our team was in the midst of Sprint 3. That means that we've had a Sprint 1 and 2 where we delivered stuff. And we're doing a key metric that comes to us from Scrum, but anybody Agile can do it, which is we're indicating the story point value of the stuff we delivered in each of those sprints, the combined story point value. And so here, when we click on that, we get that larger chart that opens up and tells us in a little bit greater detail. Here's the value that was delivered. So we've got 35 points in Sprint 1, 42 points in Sprint 2. We don't know how this team is measuring effort. We don't know the basis for those numbers. It doesn't matter, because all that matters for us is that they use whatever system they use, it's consistent. So now all we know is we don't know why that story is 8 points, but we don't have to know that. All that we know is that we can do a certain number of 8-point stories in a given sprint because that's what we've done in the past. That is key to Agile, is that ability to do a build, try something, measure the results, and then learn from what you've measured, and over time improve your ability and make the necessary changes. So here in our current sprint, we've got 18 points completed and 23 still in progress. So if we close out the velocity, we can now start to do something that is absolutely a practice at the heart of Agile, which is use our past performance to predict our future results. We know that there will be a margin of error, and we know that the more new we are to Agile, the greater that margin of error is going to be. So our predictability is not perfect here, but the point is that we're going to start to build and improve our ability to do that prediction. That's where the value of Agile really starts to show for your team. So your first couple of sprints, because you don't have those metrics already established for your team, it's going to feel very chaotic. It's going to feel like you don't know what you're doing. That is okay. You tough it out, you build up some data for your team, and then you look backwards and say, what we accomplished in our time frame is X, and that means, so now I'll turn on the forecasting tool and I'll show you how the tool supports this. It means that we can reasonably expect that we will do something similar to that in the future. So I've turned on forecasting here on the product backlog. Let me scroll over just a bit so you can, no, never mind. I'm not going to scroll over. I'm going to do that. Nice. See, I didn't even know that was there. Okay, so we are now forecasting, and what that means is there's some lines drawn in here that say, based on our previous velocity, we expect that we can do a particular number of story points in a given sprint. Now, when we first turned it on, it's given us a velocity default of 10, which is actually not what we just saw in that velocity chart. We saw 32, 30-something, and 40-something. So I'm going to say that our team's velocity at this point, our best guess is that it's about 35 story points. Again, I don't know what those story points mean, and I don't care. I just know that we can do about 35 of whatever they are. and that whatever's on the backlog was done with that same system in mind. So now the system can look and tell me that I am likely to be able to complete this many story points in sprint 4 and this many story points in sprint 5. And it's drawing just these helpful little lines. It's not a guarantee. We already know that. It's not a promise. It's just an estimate. And we know what estimates are about. So the other thing I can do is if I grab one of these really big stories and move it up in the backlog because it's taken on a higher priority and drop it there, you'll notice that those lines readjust because it's now saying in this velocity of 35 over here, I'm not going to be able to complete that plus 5 other stories. I'm only going to have room for probably these 2. Because this one is very large. So that allows you to see, and you can turn it on and off if you find it however helpful you may find it, but it allows you to get a sense of what is feasible for your team. And the longer you are doing your Agile methodology, whatever that may be, the more predictability you're going to have because you know what your team can do because they've done it. Very helpful to be able to pull that stuff off. Alrighty, so now let's see what we want to do with, this is just the backlog of stuff that is upcoming. We actually don't have any of this scheduled in the current sprint, but the CEO has called again and they're really jazzed about this weather-related outages thing. And so the product owner and our team are going to have a negotiation and determine can we pull weather-related outages into the current sprint and get it out the door at the end of the time frame in our current sprint. We're going to drag this story over in the left side menu to sprint 3 over here, which is our current sprint, and drop it right in there. You can see that when I did that, the iteration path of the story over here automatically was updated. And now I can go to the current sprint, sprint 3, and take a look at another backlog. And we can start to work in some of this really detailed sprint management backlog stuff that is another place where tons and tons and tons of value is being added for teams. Okay, so here we are in sprint 3. We've got a sprint backlog. As you may know, if you're doing an Agile project, what you're going to be doing is working in these short iterations. You've got your overall backlog, which is the values that the customer wants, the stuff the customer desires you to build. And then what you're going to do for each iteration is at or near the beginning of an iteration, you're going to have some kind of a kickoff meeting where you look at the backlog, you confirm that the backlog is in the current priorities that the customer and the product owner have determined, and you say, fine, how many of these things can we pull off the top and do we think we can get done? And we'll pull those into the sprint. And we just showed how you can, from the backlog, grab those things and drag them over, and there they are, they're in the sprint. So what you might start out with is something like this. As you get into your sprint planning session, you might start with something like this where you've got your candidate stories and they're all just dragged in here. And this is what you've got. At a high level, you know what the story is. In Scrum, your sprint planning meeting is used for this activity. You're going to choose first the number of stories you think is reasonable for your team to get done based on the story point estimations that you've placed on them previously. And then, once you've decided what a reasonable number is, your team will work together during that sprint planning session. This is why they make them 8 hours long for a month sprint. They will work together in that sprint planning session to actually break all the stories down into the component tasks that are needed to complete the work. And that's what we have here already, so this is built out for us when we get into this virtual machine. You can see that, for example, we talked about how the technicians out in the field in their trucks have mobile devices that allow them to manage their service tickets and file status. And so here we have technician service tickets on their Windows phone, and these are the subtasks that the team identified that needed to be completed in order for this story to be successfully delivered, making a Windows app and so forth. And this story happens to already be done. But of course, in your sprint planning, you would just be breaking these tasks down and maybe assigning them to developers, maybe not. And estimating some hours per task as well. So here's where you would do that. We've got a new story that we've just dragged in here. So what we want to do is, it doesn't have, there's nothing for me to drill down here, it doesn't have component tasks. Let's say that we've called an emergency team meeting and we're going to go ahead and add those. So it's very simple. I'm going to click the big plus button, and it brings me up by default. This is a new task, and the task by default is associated to the story I just clicked as a child of that story. So we have now the parent backlog item, user story requirement, whatever, and it has children that are tasks. So this is the low friction way. You're very quickly able to enter these tasks. So what we want to do is retrieve data weather information, and we're going to assign that to our data person, Cameron. And we're going to say that that's going to be, he thinks that's going to be a 5-hour task. And that's really all we got to do. We can put more data in here if we want to, but that's going to be enough for magic to happen. And something you may have noticed just occurred. Over here on the right, we had a bunch of bars that were up until this moment green, and a whole bunch of them, when I saved that task, turned red. I'm going to revisit that in just a moment. We'll talk about why that is and what you as a team are going to do about it. We're going to add one more task here, which is going to be create UI to display weather info. We're going to assign that to Annie, our developer, and she estimates that that is also going to take her 5 hours. We're going to save and close. And some lines over here are a little more subtle. More stuff moved and more stuff turned red when we did that. Well, we might remember that what we saw back on the home page was that the team had already committed. They had a total capacity in this sprint of 42 hours, and they'd already committed up to 39 of those hours. So we just added 10 more hours. We blew their math. And this is going to kind of blow out the sprint, which is a reality for a lot of teams that are trying to do Agile. This is where we get the idea in Scrum, and some of you may have, your antenna may have gone up when I said this. There's an idea in Scrum specifically that you never change the sprint once it's been started. That is not strictly true. That's not strictly what the Scrum rule is. The rule is that you can't force the development team to change the sprint without their consent. And by consent, I don't mean that you extorted it out of them out of fear of their jobs. What I mean is, if a change needs to be made to a sprint while it is in progress, the product owner and the development team have to sit down and negotiate whether that work can be accommodated in the sprint. And by accommodated, we do not mean by buying us pizza so we can work on the weekends. We mean, can it be accommodated in the actual capacity the team has? So in order to look at what chaos we've just reaped on this sprint, we're going to look at the capacity tab. And this gives us an idea of this is something where you would be building this out initially in your sprint planning. And we can see that we've got individual team members who are committed to working in this sprint and what their estimated capacity per day is. I assume that most of the activity we're doing here, capacity and task-wise, is going to be in hours. I think as long as you can find a math system that works for you, you don't have to make it by hours, but you would probably typically. It's easier to understand. And you can actually indicate for each one of these individuals if they have a specialty band of activity that they do, if one is a developer or one is a tester, and you need to manage it at that level on your team, you can. So you can specify that you have X hours for testers and X hours for developers, and never the twain shall meet if that happens. We have here that Annie has a capacity of 3 hours per day to give to this project, and she has 1 day off scheduled in the sprint, and we can add all that information here. So this was set up at the beginning of the sprint. So now we see that this is the formula that's being used to figure out how much capacity does the team have to do the work that they've estimated, and we've taken on a lot more work than they can accommodate. And there's a number of ways that we might choose to deal with that. If Yulia, who's our other developer, can be pulled off of one of her other projects and increase the amount of work she has available in the sprint, then we can see that her bar down here at the bottom just got a lot bigger. She went from having 6 hours to having 12. So she now has capacity. What we might then do is take some of Cameron's or Annie's tasks and assign them to Yulia to make up some of that balance, right, so that she's taking on some of the stuff that they don't have time to do. Or we could go back to, she was at 2, I believe. Yep, we can go back to 2 and go back to the sprint backlog. So we're seeing that same thing over here on the right in terms of our capacity. And we can see that we have, let me just collapse these down. The team is using actually a really good practice here that comes to us from another Agile process, another Agile-ish process called Kanban. Kanban recommends that you limit your work in process. In some ways, the fact that you're doing short iterations with a fixed small amount of work kind of does that. But within the sprint, the team is actually using that Kanban technique of limiting their work in process even further. So they've been working on just these tasks that they've gotten done, and they've got just one underway. Let's go look at what that looks like on their task board, and you'll be able to see it a lot more clearly. Here's our news story that is yet to be done. As we scroll down, you can see that this story, the service tickets, is all the way done, and all the tasks are done. because we've got a board here that starts with little tickets to do. These are individual tasks. These are things that are in progress, and these are the ones that are done. We can see at the top that we've got 36 hours of work that is not yet started, 13 that's underway, and once it's done, it's automatically zeroed out. So let's collapse down these done stories to get them out of our way. And now we can see that we've got one story in progress, two stories in progress, and one story that is completely not started. So we've got 23 hours worth of work here that is completely not started because the team's not going to start it until one or both of these stories is all the way done. That is an awesome practice because it gives us some flexibility that we need. I'm going to bounce back to the backlog very quickly, and then we'll come right back here and look at this board some more. It gives us the flexibility that we need to solve our sprint capacity problem because we don't have a bunch of half-done or wasted work on this story that's not been started at all. We're going to just grab this story and we're going to say, hey, product owner, which one is more important? Do you want the weather outages or do you want the customer contact details on the phone? And the product owner says, look, man, the CEO is on my back about this. They really want the weather thing. They want a cool map. It's because our other telecom company across town's got one, and we've got to have a better one, and we need it really soon. And we say as a team, no problem. If you'll let us drop this story, we'll take that story, and we'll be able to get it done. Product owner says, that sounds worth it to me. I'm going to just grab this story out of Sprint 3, and I'm going to drag it to Sprint 4. Or if I wanted to, I could drag it back onto the main backlog. I'm going to put it in Sprint 4. It and all of its little children tasks are going to go, and look at how green we just turned here. So now if we know that we now need a cool animated map or embedded flash or Silverlight or heaven knows what, we've got lots more capacity to make this story better if that's what our customer or stakeholder wants us to do. So now we're back in the green, the team is happy. That's a successful negotiation, and in the rules of Scrum and other Agile methodologies, completely cool to do. The team gave itself that flexibility by having that story at the end not yet started, so it was able to be dropped without any disruption to the work the team is doing. Now we're back on the task board, and you can see that we'll be able to just very quickly track the team's progress. This is something that we might, you'll notice the backlog, the burn down chart updated, so that's cool too. The team can come in here and should update this at least every day, but really more often than every day. As they're working on their tasks, somebody should come in here and update the status of these. If it's the developer, great. If they're checking in stuff against these tasks and updating the tasks from Visual Studio with their check-ins, you're going to get a lot of this for free. And so as our developers work, we're going to drag these tasks across the board. So Annie and Cameron are going to get started on this work right away. If I want to reassign to another member of the team, I can. So Yulia is going to take this one on instead. As they are working, they might update every day the remaining work. That's what the burn down chart is built on. So they're going to update the remaining work as they go. And then when they are done, we're going to drag those stories over into the done column. And as you can see, they automatically update to zero out the remaining work. If I find work that was missed or it fails a test and I need to drag it back, it's going to prompt me that I need to open it up and add the remaining work back in. So now I've found 2 more hours, and I'm going to close that out, and now it is happy. And then when that work gets done, I can drag it to done again. Really, really fast and easy to manage your tasks this way. There are lots of other ways to update tasks, but the point here is that it's just something very, very fast. And now when we click on the burn down, we can get this very detailed burn down chart that includes, here's the remaining work. Notice our remaining work fell off a cliff because we pulled a whole story out of the sprint. That's fine. That's the story we're telling. And then here's our line that tells us today. And since our sprint is scheduled to end on February 17th, we know that because it was on the home page, and it's also right up here, hiding. This trend line tells us, kind of smooths out those bumps and gives us an idea of whether we are generally on track to make our end of sprint date, and it's looking pretty good. So the team can come and look at this anytime they want to get a sense of whether they think things are okay or if things need to be adjusted. Do they need to put more work in? Do they need to rebalance workloads amongst themselves? Do they need to help out the testers because the testers have fallen behind? That happens a lot. Or it's not the tester's fault. Whatever it is. Alrighty. Hey, we've got a question. Is there a way to automate that the developer has started a task? That question will come in when we do another session later. We'll be talking about the My Work panel in Visual Studio, and we'll look at ways that the developers can sort of claim the tasks put on for themselves and indicate in Visual Studio as they are coding which tasks they are working on. So we'll look at that when we do the Agile development session and the day in the life of the developer. We'll do a little deeper dive there. There are some very cool ways for the developers to that make it really seamless for them without having to remember to open up the web browser and drag stickies around, though they might want to because it's fun. One more quick view, and then we will wrap up and take additional questions. I've clicked over to the Team Members tab. This is basically the same view, right? It's the same task board, but instead of being broken down per story, we see it broken down per person. And so an individual, you can come in here and see that Annie's got an hour of work on her plate, Brian's got 5 hours of work on his plate, Cameron's still got 8 hours, etc. And we can see what all they've gotten done in the current sprint and what they are working on currently. Again, this is something we can use to help us load balance. I was trying to remember if you can drag stuff up and down the thing, and I don't think you can. But I have to feel like that's coming. So you can't. You gotta use the little drop down to reassign it. But someday, dragging up and down, that's got to happen. Quick look at the Work Items tab. The Work Item Query Editor is pretty much the same as it's been in other versions of TFS. So you can recognize that the Query Editor is here, and you can do a lot of stuff with that. Alrighty, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take us back to our slide deck. That's up here. I got a button for that. And just kind of talk you through the, a quick summary of what your Agile development process might look like in the new Visual Studio 11, currently in beta. Hopefully that means something that's not beta is coming. Alrighty, so we've looked at that demo. So as an Agile team, you're going to start out by building your backlog, the state of all truth for your application, and that's going to be a backlog of stuff that your customer or your stakeholders want, stuff that they care about, and it's going to be expressed in ways that they can understand the value that those backlog items deliver. That's going to be overseen by some kind of a product owner, somebody who is responsible for knowing what the backlog means and for negotiating with the customers about what's on it and what order that stuff goes in. You'll plan sprints as you go. So you'll set a cadence of what delivery schedule you want to be on. Do you want it to be 1 month sprints, 2 week sprints, 1 week sprints, 1 day sprints, whatever works for you. And as a team, you get together at the beginning of each one of those. You pick an appropriate amount of work that you believe that you can finish in that sprint. You're going to be building up data in Visual Studio to help you answer that question so that you can look at your backlog and say, with a lot of confidence, I can pull this many items off the top, and I have a good idea that I will be able to get them done in this amount of time because we've done it before. And then you break those things down into the tasks, and you really plan your tactical execution of all of the stuff that's on your sprint backlog. As your sprint progresses, you're going to measure everything that you do. So you're going to measure how long it has taken you to deliver those tasks, and you'll notice that you've got stuff that's going to come up over time, and all of that stuff is going to be measurable in Visual Studio. So you've got your hours, your remaining work each day. As it changes, you'll indicate how much work is remaining on the remaining stories. You'll have that burn down to tell you how you're doing. You'll have a really good idea of whether you're going to finish the sprint on time or if adjustments are needed. You'll refine your ability to respond to stuff as it comes up. You'll practice negotiating with the product owner to deal with change in the middle of a sprint because it's going to happen. You can't protect your sprint from change any more than you could protect a giant waterfall project from change, and it would be silly to think that you can, so instead you manage it. All of that is facilitated by the new tools in Visual Studio 11 so that you've got easy places to track that data and useful reports that tell you a useful story about how you are doing or how you've done in the past. And then when you finish delivering, you get to celebrate. So all of those are pictures that are from my own actual teams of us actually doing those things. So definitely be sure to celebrate at the end of every sprint and praise your team for its success, especially success in learning how they should work together. That's what's going to deliver you the greatest value in Agile. The tools just make it easy to do, but the real work is being done by your team figuring out how to solve your challenging development problems and how to work together. Those are the hard part. So the idea is that your tools should get out of your way, and I think Visual Studio 11 does the best job I've seen so far of the tools doing the stuff you need done and not making you do a bunch of excess stuff, getting out of your way so that you can focus on the important work. With that, hi, this is me again. I'm Cheryl Hammond, and I'm an ALM consultant with Northwest Cadence. This is my contact information. If you're interested in jotting any of that stuff down, I would be very happy to hear from you about anything I've covered today or in any of my future sessions. I did want to point out to you my blog. It's blog.basketcase.com. On my blog, there is an events page, so if you found this talk interesting and you want to know more about what I like to talk about, there's a whole list of all my upcoming events there, and with links to register for the events as appropriate. So if you want to hear any of the future webcasts that I've mentioned, Agile development, day in the life of a developer, we've got a day in the life of a Scrum Master, we've got a session on the feedback tools. All of those are things I'll be delivering in the next couple of months, and that listing and schedule is there. And then finally, at Northwest Cadence, this is the stuff that we do. We specialize in consulting with your teams about application lifecycle management from both the process aspects and the practices. You've heard me give you lots of unsolicited advice today. We do that. We also do the tools and support. So we have training on the new changes in Visual Studio 11 available right now. We can also come to your organization if you're using a previous version of Visual Studio or any other product currently to manage your software process. We can do a quick health check to assess your readiness to upgrade to Visual Studio 11 so that whether you want to do it now with the Go Live beta or if you want to do it later when the more stable candidates come out, that's your team's choice, but we will be happy to come and help you make that transition as smooth and fast as possible. And so I'll leave this slide up for just another moment with our contact information. You may have mine from a previous slide. I would be happy to take your questions about that. Or you can contact Rick Flass. He's on the slide here. Both of us are at nwcadence.com and find out more about our offerings related to Visual Studio 11. We would love to help get you guys jump-started. So with that, I'll hang out for another few minutes to take any other questions you may have, and I know Phil wants to talk to you about the survey.
Yes, I do. Thanks, Cheryl. And ladies and gentlemen, if you do have any more questions for Cheryl, please go ahead, click on your Q&A menu option at the top of your screen, type your question into the field provided, and then click the word Ask. Don't click the hand. That's not going to submit your question. You will need to click the word Ask. Also, these slides are available for download. If you'd like to go to your lower right-hand corner of your client, click on the printer icon. You can download those in a PDF format for local safe on your machine. And as Cheryl mentioned, this is the portal to the post-event evaluation, and we do ask that you please take a moment to fill this out before logging off today. You can get to it by all of these links, anonymous, registered online, or all other registrants, depending on how you registered for today's session. And we do very much value your feedback. It will affect future content for these webcasts, so please take a moment to do that while we address further questions. And with that, I will turn the floor back over to Cheryl for any further questions or any closing statements.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. Please, please, please fill out the survey. I really, really want your feedback. Thank you. Okay, so Scott has an awesome question. Does ALM come with Visual Studio 2011, or does it cost extra? Does it require Team Foundation Server? So this is a good question, and I'll try to give you a reasonably brief answer. ALM refers to Application Lifecycle Management, and ALM is kind of the whole concept that Visual Studio 11 and Team Foundation Server are built to address. So the idea is all the stuff that you need to manage your software practices and process from end to end. Different aspects of ALM are built into all of the Visual Studio products and Team Foundation servers. So to be more specific about what we've looked at today, to do the stuff that we saw today would take two things. One is Team Foundation Server in place in your organization, and the other would be Visual Studio Premium licenses to get the full value of all of the backlog management and sprint planning tools. So Visual Studio comes in several different licenses, but the ones we're familiar with are Professional Premium and Ultimate Premium is what a lot of folks have. And some of the basic features come with just Professional and TFS installed. Ultimate Premium, Professional all come with a Team Foundation server license. I believe you no longer have to purchase the server license separately. I believe it comes with the Visual Studio licenses that you get for your developers. If you have a lot of folks on your team, usually they also come with a handful of additional access licenses for your non-developers, or there's some fixed price that you pay to get the individual license. So as you can tell, I don't sell the stuff. I don't know the licenses that well. But what you want to look at is putting Team Foundation Server in place for your team, If you don't have a very large team or you don't have the infrastructure to support doing the server locally, you might look into the upcoming offerings of Team Foundation Service. You can search for that term. The service is a hosted by Microsoft version of TFS in the cloud. You connect Visual Studio and the other access tools to it exactly the same way as everything you saw today. So it's pretty seamless. It looks just like a server that lives in your organization, but it's in the cloud instead. And then you use the web access is what we used today to look at the task boards and the sprint planning tools and the backlog management. And then you can also point a Visual Studio instance at it for your developers. So that's kind of your basics, is getting TFS, the server component, in place, making sure that all the people who want to access the data on the server have an access license. You get one automatically with Visual Studio. Folks who don't use Visual Studio would have a separate license. So I hope that answers your question, Scott. Oops, and then Yelena, hi Yelena. Yelena's having trouble with the survey. Thank you for going to the survey, and I'll let Phil help you out with that. If you have any other questions about the content of the presentation, I'll stick around for another couple minutes and let me know.
All right, thank you, Cheryl. And ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude the formal part of today's webcast. We will leave this portal open for you to submit any questions, and we'll get those to Cheryl post-event. In the meantime, please do fill out the post-event evaluation. And we do thank you for joining us on today's session, and a special thanks to Cheryl Hammond for her presentation and information. You may now all disconnect from the audio portion of today's webcast, and have a great day.